back there, I'm giving you 20 seconds to get out of the founder's room and get in here.
Coffee?
Oh, Lutherans and their coffee.
Wah, wah, wah.
Golden calf.
I am for that golden calf, by the way. I am for it. Put that in the notes. In the notes.
All right. Wow, I'm really hot. Okay. I'm really thankful that Chuck was able to be with us for this weekend and to share a lot of information with us. This is an opportunity for you to ask him any question dealing with youth ministry, youth, young adult. Well, probably you'll take almost any question, right? Yep. Something dealing with like the, Council of Nicaea or...
I will take that question, but I've gotten really good at saying, I don't know.
Okay. But also, just a quick word, we will have lunch right after this, and then we'll have a communion service after that, and Julie will be sharing the word with us, so please stick around for that. But I want to open up the floor for anyone who has questions, but I want to start with one, just because I am Gen X, and I come from that particular generation in which if we had a feeling, we were told to stop feeling that and suck it up and move on. You talked about anxiety, the anxiousness of the younger generations, both Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Can you just explain a little bit more? Where does that come from? What has the research been showing of what their struggles are with that? How are they even coping with it, or are they? How can we help them?
Ooh, how are they coping with it? That's a great question. Anxiety, Anxious Generation is a great book. Jonathan Haidt has done a great job of kind of naming something really clear that many people are feeling. If you sat through yesterday, you know that the way that Gen Z describes itself most often is anxious. The difficulty of that, and this is something that we don't say in our research, is that a lot of that comes from the way that we parent. And so, without blaming parents for that reality, I think there's something in the water that kids have been brought up, especially Gen Z was brought up to be wary of a lot of things in the world. Going back to Gen X being brought up, you wonder where this idea about getting taken. The white van myth, that idea that you're going to, show up and go away.
Do you know where your children are?
Yeah, that 10 o'clock, do you know where your children are kind of stuff. The ways those things start are out of good intention, right? I don't know if any of you all know, but like all of that really started because of faces on milk cartons. We can trace it right back to faces on milk cartons. And the hard part about that was that there were, at the very beginning of that, there were probably only about 100 kids that they were really looking for. 100 kids. But you had thousands of milk cartons, right? Thousands of milk cartons. All across, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe all these kids. I need to protect my kid. Right? And so American protectionism has become a pastime of ours in a lot of ways. And so kids feel that anxiety. Kids respond to that anxiety, and they move back into spaces where it's like I'm gonna hide behind my parents in order to continue to feel safe in this world, right? So anxiety begins in a lot of spaces like that, where parents are nervous about their world and what's going on. I went back and looked at some of the late the kind of the exennial folks and then millennial parenting. And what you find in that is that those folks were really scarred in this world for multiples of reasons, and specifically with the church, really scarred. And I think there's something to be said for the ways that they raise their own kids. Impacts that they've made. So I say that not to blame them as like, oh yeah, you did a bad job, but they were just operating out of the things that they had learned out of their own lives. And we all do, right? We walk into parenting. I do a whole other talk on parenting, and I talk about like the excitement and joy of walking into parenting. For those of you who have kids, is this idea of like, oh my gosh, this is super exciting. I'm going to do this thing, and I'm scared out of mind because I don't know what to do, and the only thing that I really know what to do is what my parents did with me. And I think there's something to be said for kind of like, hey, how do we pick our heads up and think further out towards what do I want with my kids at the end of the day? Jim Burns has a great conversation about like, hey, what do you want for your kids at the end of the day? He talks about, in college, they were just excited to have their kids come around. And there's a few different people that'll say this, and I'll say this really clearly, is like, at the very end of the day, I've got my daughter who's 22, 23. The highest hopes that I have for her. Number one is if she follows Jesus. I don't know what that looks like for her. I don't know what denomination. I don't know what I like. Let's just have a conversation, and she's like, "Yeah, I still follow Jesus. Cool. I'm good. Your politics, your whatever. Like, I don't care as long as you're following Jesus." And then two, I just hope that she wants to hang out with us when she doesn't have to. Right? That there's some relationship there. There's a connectivity there. That there's a return to home, and I don't have control over that. One of the pieces about anxiety that Haidt talks about specifically is about technology, and I think that's one of the really big pieces that we really need to engage in this time. Jonathan Haidt would say that you should not allow your kids to have social media until they're 18. Because of the way that kids' brains are being wired during the time they're growing, the ways that these companies have engaged in creating these apps and these experiences for kids are rewiring their brains so they're actually not able to function in the world in the same way that you and I function in the world. And so he says, 18. I don't know if you saw recently, but there are two countries in Europe, and I'm forgetting the countries right now, who just said that it is illegal for kids to have social media on their phones until they have reached the age of 16. And they cited Jonathan Haidt's stuff in there and said, like, we're at 16. He recommends 18, but we're at 16. And there's some cultural pieces to that. England did it at 15 because there's some cultural pieces around that felt like that was the right moment, and they're still trying to figure out how to do that. And so in our community today, that's gonna be hard to do. But in our internal moments, I think it's an opportunity. So that's one way that's being impactful. The way that kids are dealing with their anxiety. They're nursing. And by that I mean, specifically with social media, that phone becomes a pacifier. Scrolling becomes a pacifier for anxiety and stress until they get stressed by the thing that's on their phone. Right? And they get stressed by the thing they're on their phone, they put that down and go do something else, but that something else is never outside. It's not running around, it's not kind of, doing whatever, as opposed to Gen X, right? Where it was like, yeah, just suck it up. Go outside for a while and come back when the streetlights come on, right? Okay, yes, I'll go outside, survive out there somewhere. There are more resources being developed and created. So I'm answering that question in one other way. The therapeutic opportunities that kids have today are so much more significant than they were back when I was younger, right? And when we were younger, right? You can get on teleconferencing with a therapist at any place, any time. Most of the healthcare companies are saying like, yeah, we want to make sure that you have access to healthcare, preventative healthcare. I wish they would do that more with regular healthcare, but they're giving you access to preventative healthcare in ways, mental healthcare, excuse me, that is really important, and kids are having access to that. One of the benefits of that is they're having great conversations about who they are and where they are and what's going on with them internally in their mental health. One of the drawbacks to that is they've got language around mental health that actually isn't helpful, especially in the way that they talk about trauma. Trauma is like a buzzword, and it kind of is like, hey, if you don't have trauma, you're kind of weird, right? Like everybody has trauma, so like let's figure out what your trauma is, and I'll figure out what my trauma is. We kind of get in this weird place of like, the trauma Olympics when kids are talking. It's like, oh, my trauma is worse than yours. Well, my trauma is different than yours, and we all need to cry together because we all have trauma. So I think there's something positive and negative about those spaces of anxiety that kids are dealing with. So, other thoughts, questions? Oh, I get the hot mic. Cool.
You want me to do a mic or you go ahead?
No, I think I got it. For those in the room, don't take this the wrong way. How are you seeing medicinals see the effect of the anxiety? And also the questions relative to where do I fit in this social dynamic that's promoted, for lack of better word, self-medication?
Yeah. We have a really bad theology of that, just to start. We just have a bad theology of medicinals. And I say that from the standpoint of Christians, generally speaking, have a bad theology of utilizing whatever it is to medicate ourselves. Whether that is alcohol, drugs, vice of multiple sorts, we just have bad theologies of that. In a lot of respects, our theology does not address the reality of idolatry that is at the center of those things. And for most kids, like, idolatry doesn't make sense. Like, what are you talking about? I don't worship this. I don't do. But I think we've got a bad theology just as a start. I think that was one of the challenges when California, Colorado, Oregon were kind of the first, Hawaii were the first kind of places, especially when they legalized marijuana usage in small doses for folks, right? I say that because, when I was in a church at the time, and I'm like, okay, how do we deal with this? Because it's different, right? It's always been, no, you don't do that. How's that changed, right? Because now it's legal. Okay, what's the legality? A lot of churches hide behind the legality of drinking for kids, and how do we pull that off? So I think the theology we need to dive into and ask good questions. I think what you're asking though is really well, what do we say? How do we lean in, right? What do we talk about? And I think there's always that question of and I had a slide about it yesterday, is like, what's the question behind the question, right? Not why do you think you're drinking, or why do you think you're doing that, or what's the secondary question there? What are you feeling while you do that? And I think those type of questions, those engagements with kids, are going to get you to a better place of talking about what they're doing and why they're doing it. Now, some of that borders on psychological engagement as well. But I think there's something better about having those longer conversations and sitting there long enough to let them show you who they are. That is part of that. I think third, I would say, so that's a very individual kind of addressing of the issue. I think you've got to have a broader conversation about who we want to be in this world from a church standpoint. There's some real good data about the conversations that are happening in some churches out in front that are the hard conversations, right? The hard conversations in our community right now, politics, right? We don't have a conversation about politics because we have, the things that I've heard people say, well, we're a purple church. We're excited to be a purple church. I'm like, wow, really? Like, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? We lean right, and we have these other conversations. Okay, so but what are we doing in terms of having that conversation in the midst of, say, a worship service, and just saying, hey, we want to have a good conversation about how our theology is driving our decisions here. And I think we need to have those conversations in different places and really lower the anxiety and the pressure for all of us in the space to have a right answer immediately. And I've watched a few different churches have those conversations, either online or offline. Online is in a worship space. Offline is outside of the worship space, and an invitational space where you can say, hey, look, we're just going to have a conversation. We don't know we have all the answers right now. And I think that's just not... that goes against our current culture. Nobody's having those conversations in that type of space, and if we invite that conversation with a centrality on Jesus and Scripture, I think there's something to be said for kids watching that and going, oh, okay, we can actually have these conversations about this particular thing, whether it's alcohol or politics or race or whatever else the vices are. And I think our churches need to have a better opportunity to do those things. So, yeah, keep coming this way. Yeah, go ahead. You're good.
My question's related to, it appears that a lot of young men are less interested in dating and engaging in behavior with pornography more so than dating. Obviously, there's long-term risk involved with that, but can you comment on whether you see that as a trend and how we as a church can engage with that situation?
Yeah, there's a big push right now in a couple spaces of the church for mentoring, and specifically men mentoring younger men. And I think that's something we probably need to lean into. There's a lot of men in the church that have some great ideas and thoughts about what it means to be, to lean into relationship in this world. I'm not going to say what it means to be men, because I think that has been taken and kind of shifted to this odd thing over here that I don't even know what that means. And so this idea that we can have folks that walk with us to answer the questions of how I'm supposed to respond in this particular way. How am I supposed to lean in? How am I supposed to treat people around me, especially women in my life, right? The questions of that are really helpful to men. So I think mentoring is one response that the church is having towards that. I think the other thing you're asking about is kind of the influx of pornography. Here's the reality. If you're on social media, male or female, you've been exposed to pornography in a way that is too much. Period. Full stop. Any one of those spaces has so much access to that. What we're seeing is that women are actually engaging in pornographic materials at a higher rate than men are at this particular moment. The impact of that is massive. And so there are a lot of kids out there that, I'm going to try this one on anybody. My daughter didn't want to have her driver's license at 16. She was kind of like, whatever, I don't even want to deal with that. Went back here, there's a few more, wait a second, I don't want to have that responsibility. Can you just keep driving me? That's the same thing that's going on with relationships. It's well, this feels really heavy. They're watching their parents and kind of grandparents and kind of going, well, this seems really heavy. Sometimes it works, most times it doesn't in their experience. And so that feels a lot of weight for them. And so again, trying to lower the pressure that kids feel to do this. They don't know what they're doing, especially Gen Alpha and younger Gen Z. Hanging out with dating, one-on-one, what are we doing here? We don't even know. And so that's where you get some of the 30-year-olds now going, man, it's been really hard to find a date. Well, of course, because people aren't dating. They're just finding people and hanging out for a little while and saying, this is kind of fun. Why don't we why don't we make it a thing, right? So there's some teaching that has to happen, so starting with the mentoring piece, but there's also some awareness that needs to happen broader about how kids are being impacted by the things that they're learning, especially women right now with pornography, men the same thing. That I don't think that's changed, and we need to continue to say like, hey, walk away from that. That's messing with your brain, and that's giving you different vision for what that looks like. What I'll say about women is that it's giving them a submissive perspective of sex in a way that is terrible, is absolutely terrible because of the way that pornography is scripted. It really comes mostly from the male perspective, and so like I just think that there's some things that we've got to really kind of deal with in those spaces. So I hope that's a helpful response.
I have a question about, and I was not in your thing yesterday, so if this is addressed, you can skip over it. But I think we talked a lot about the negative reality, especially being people who look back and the generation say, oh, it was better when. What are they better at than us? What are they doing well? What's exciting about the things that you look at in the research that you're like, oh, that's something cool that hasn't happened in a long time. And we'll see what God does with that through the years as they age.
Someone said it at a table yesterday, and I was like overhearing it more than I was actually in the conversation. But one of the things that I've started saying is that the church should have the corner on the market on relationships. We should have the corner of the market on the relationships. You should be able to walk into a church and know that you're going to have a good relationship with the people there, because number one, the Lord's given us the ways to continue to have good relationships, not only to repair relationships, but what is the impetus for us to love? Full stop, right? And I think if we do those things well, and that's part of what I was talking about last night. If we do those things well, then I think we're going to engage communities that haven't had relationships in those ways really well. So number one, I think generations past were forced to do relationships. Why? Because we didn't have other ways to engage, right? I think the generations that are coming up, there's a couple indicators for us that they're wanting that more often, and when, especially for kids that show up in college, right, at dormitories and things like that, are like, wait, oh my gosh, I've got to figure this out. In those spaces, they're walking with friends, they're hanging out, they're engaging in a way that's like, I'm interested to see how that is different than it used to be for many of us in the past. It was like, oh yeah, well, I'm just going to go and I'm going to go find friends. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to experience what this means to be in relationship with people in a different way than I have been before. Now you got your high school friends and those people like that, but you're not living with them, right? And I think that's where some of that is changing. It also changes in the military, right? So like you're in places where you're in relationship with people, and so those two pieces tend to be high on the list of like when kids are engaging with one another in relationship, in person, there's a very different affect that's happening than it is online. I think I'm interested to see how Gen Z parents, when they become parents, are going to start parenting their Gen Alpha / younger kids. Because of what they've experienced in COVID, I think there's something that I just don't know what the response is going to be. Is it going to be a fearful response, or it's going to be like, hey, we need to go celebrate and get out in the world? And I think both of those things are true. And the more that I think we can get out in the world and help kids experience something different, we can help them experience the failures out there really well. We can experience successes really well. We can experience emotion that isn't overwhelming really well. We can help them experience relationships that are positive and that are helpful and that are encouraging and supportive in ways that long-term will help them live in this world. I think those are some things that the church can really lean into and help them engage with. I always saw myself as someone when, even way back when, it's like, my job is to kind of give a safe place for kids to explore their relationships together and explore these new things that their parents probably would always say no to. Right? And it wasn't like, oh no, we're going to do these dangerous things, because most of it was safe, right?
Most of it
was safe. But it gave them that sense of excitement and joy and like, oh my gosh, we get to explore something that's new. And I think there's something really great about that, especially when we talk about faith. And giving them places to explore their faith and experience faith and space for the Holy Spirit to lean in, that will be new and different. Those are the things that I'm watching out for in real time. So,
we did get some submissions, and I think you touched on a couple of these. One was dealing with how to promote personal connection over social media connection, and then the other is dealing how to address and reduce anxiety from electronic shame and fear of cyberbullying, apart from taking the phone away, because they can't live without it, basically. So could you address basically the relationship side of things already, but how about dealing with the cyberbullying, that sort of a thing?
Bullying is a whole other set of problems. And when kids are being bullied, for the most part, they're not going to say much. It was kind of 2010s-ish. Cyberbullying was massive on the scene, right? Again, social media has changed in the last 20 years. I mean, since its kind of inception in real ways, right? So I'm not talking about AOL chat rooms, right? Right? That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, smartphones, once we have it in our pockets, in our space. So 2006, right, is this kind of advent of smartphones, smarter phones, Blackberries, things like that. So you get this sense of like, oh, I get real-time data about what people are saying about me. We've gone away from that to now we get curated data about what people are saying in this world and might see about me. So cyberbullying has taken on this very, very different engagement than it used to. And so what you'll see on graphs like cyberbullying is actually down. Right? But that doesn't mean it's not happening. It's just happening in people's direct messages and not in like open space. Trying to give kids a foundation that allows them to know their identity, belonging, and purpose in more significant ways so that they're not sucked into what other people will say is the biggest thing that youth pastors have been doing for decades. How do we help them really understand and have a foundation for who they are? And I don't know that it's any different now than it was 40 years ago when I was in youth group, right? It is that continual like, hey, you're smarter than you think you are. So there's something about counteracting that reality for kids and cheering them on and giving them the ability to have purpose. And a lot of what I was talking about before gives them that counteraction and say like, wait a second, what you're saying about me isn't true. I'm going to go with the thing that is actually true of me, and I see adults experiencing and helping us see. That's where the rites of passage stuff comes in and starts to really help us as a community say, we're going to raise you up and we're going to push you out into the world saying you can do this, and if anything happens you can come fall back and we're going to help you reset and keep pushing you out. But I think those are the questions that come up. Now when it comes to cyber stuff, it feels like it's more significant, and we've talked a lot about it here, but it's not super different than what's happened before. The issues are still the same, the shame, the pain, the scared, the wanting to be invited into. What we used to say is kids felt lonely and anxious because they were able to like sit on their bed and scroll and watch their friends go have fun, in real time while they're thinking, why aren't I there, right? But that's not necessarily the case anymore because it's not real time, it's curated lists of things, it doesn't function in that same way anymore. Some places do, TikTok does in a lot of ways, and we've talked a little bit about that. Snapchat does, but you've got to be sent messages, that's more direct messages, but there's not a scroll like there was on Facebook and Instagram where it was like, I'm just watching in real time what's going on. Yeah. I saw another question back here. Yeah.
In my breakout with you yesterday, you mentioned there was a question that was asked about revival, and you said that there are a couple of key things that you're still looking for before you can say, yes, we're seeing a revival. Yeah. I'm just curious what those things are that you're still looking for.
Yeah. To have classic revival, traditional revival, one of the key features of classic and traditional revival is repentance. And that's not what we're seeing, not only from the church, but from those who are attending. The church is just excited about people showing up right now, and they're not repentant of the ways that they're actually engaging. And they're not saying, we're so sorry, we've led you astray, come back to the church. That's a massive indicator of revival in space. The other one is a wholesale shift of what's happening in these churches. So Asbury was fantastic in leading what was going on there, and they've had some opportunities to lean in. But for the most part, their systems didn't change. And with revival, there's always some sort of system that kind of shifts and changes. I'll point back to, anybody remember the shift that happened in the late 80s around small groups? And we went from small groups, and then everybody started doing cell groups, right? This idea around cell groups is like, oh my gosh, I'm going to grow to 10 people. And when we get 10, we're going to separate out, and we're going to, then we're going to invite more people in, and that's how we're going to grow. And that all came out of a revival in South Korea, the South Korean churches, that's how they decided to grow. Then they were teaching about it at a Baptist convention in Canada, in Toronto, Canada. And that's where like a bunch of Baptists who don't believe this, that the Spirit would fell into this space of like, oh my gosh, God's moving. And so now it came to the US through that kind of space of like, we did things wrong and now we're going to shift and we're going to be these cell groups. Now, culturally, cell groups never worked with us. We got friends and we were like, yeah, we like our cell group and we're not splitting. There's no way I'm doing this, right? And so that was something that we didn't take into account when we were creating these things. But I can't tell you how many churches were like, we're going to do this, we're going to grow massive. It took root in ethnic communities for whom that was an amazing space, and they saw themselves as a larger community than we did in the American evangelical churches, and I think there's something to be said for that. So I think there's like the cultural reality, the repentance reality, and the shift in structures reality that we're really looking for. Yeah.
As we were leaving our hotel this morning, there was a girls' soccer team from the University of Chicago. What? Softball. Softball team. Anyway, softball from the University of Chicago.
Yeah.
And I wonder how they play softball there this time of year, but that's another story. The camaraderie and the conversations that were going on there as they waited for their bus to pull up, very few phones were out. There was a lot of chatter. And so can you talk about the youth retreat, the youth mission trip, those other kinds of things which pull them away from wherever their Chicago is?
Yep.
and et cetera.
Yep. One of the things that we've learned in Gen Z, and I don't know why I haven't said this up to this point in time, the Gen Z and Gen Alpha, is that as we've been talking about phones and social media and stuff, one of the points that we studied, and I can't remember where it is, it's in the 60%. 60% of kids responded that they don't actually want to be on their phones. They don't want to be on their phones. So the ones that are, and that are like, hey, like I'm just going to grab my phone, it's like, once again, it's like a pacifier I was saying before, right? It's like this thing that just kind of like, well, I'm not doing anything else, let me just reach into that. When we've given them opportunities to not be on their phones, they lean in really hard, especially this generation now, as they're going, yeah, great, I don't have to be on this thing, cool, I can actually engage with people, and though they're stunted in their relational engagement, they're able to do that because they're recognizing real emotions, real feelings, real engagement, the way that we are created to be with one another in real time, real space, right? It's the reason why we gather for large business meetings, right? It's the reason why for reformed communities, for the most part, will say, hey, you can't vote unless you're in the room. Now, we've changed that a lot. But does anybody remember why we said that? Anybody? No. It was all the theological idea that the Holy Spirit was in the room. And if you weren't in the room, that you couldn't experience that what other people were experiencing in the room. So we've let go of our theology for the sake of readiness. We're like, maybe the Holy Spirit can get through a screen, right? But I'll tell you what, maybe, and I think that may be true, but there's something real about being in the room, right? There's something real about being in a room when someone says something impactful and you hear the gasps or the air gets sucked out. Like, you can't get that across the room and go, wait a second, we're hearing something together in this moment that's significant we should pay attention to. Right? And so like we've given some of those things away. When it comes to kids in that space, give them more opportunities to give their phones away. There's school districts across the country right now that are inviting kids to like lock away their phones, and kids are like, yeah, absolutely, get this thing out of here. Like, I would love to just be in relationship with folks and like not have to worry about this thing that's buzzing all the time in my pocket. It's a distraction. It's terrible. Years ago, I was doing it before like I knew any research around it. It was like, all right, we're going to get on the bus. Put your phones in the box. You'll get them back when we get there. And my biggest pushback at the time wasn't the kids; it was the parents. And the parents were like, well, how am I going to know where my kid is? I mean, I got Life 360 on that phone. I know where they want to know where they are at all times, right? I was telling someone. Walking in that my niece crashed on her scooter just yesterday, and she's up at school. My niece and my daughter are at school together at Berkeley, which is really fun, but she fell. And her mom was the one that was alerted first because they got Life 360 on her phone and called the phone, and there was no pickup because she was on the ground and like laid out, right? And there's this sense of like, I want to know at the very second something happens to my kid. And so it's us as parents, we've got to lower their anxiety in order to say, look, your kid's going to be fine. Remember, there's whole systems set up for you to know and be identified and when something happens to your kid. And I've had to like walk with parents more than I had to walk with the kids around that. I remember one kid was like, okay, I showed up and they threw their phone in the box. And I was like, that's not your phone. Did you get a new phone? Like some old, like janky old phone? I was like, they're like, And mom came up and said, I just really want him to have his own phone. Like, I was like, I had to pull her aside and be like, look, like, we're trying to get them to connect. She's like, I just want to make sure. I was like, look, you have my number. It works at this camp. Like, you can get a hold of me at any point in time. I had to set up check-ins for mom, like every day, so she could just hear her son's voice. And so there's pieces of that is just a part of like teaching the whole community how to lean in and how to engage one another, that I think are going to be really helpful over the long term. Those things. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it goes back to what I was saying before, is they learn it through the parents, and the parents are just like, I should know where my kid is at every moment, you know? I can't tell you, like, growing up the way that we grew up, there was so much joy in being able to, like, run off and go do something. I mean, for the most part, it was like, I wasn't nefarious. Like, we were throwing dirt clods in the, you know, like at Army men in the field next door, right? Like, that was what was going on. But I had a practice. Let me put this in a better terminology. I had a practice of autonomy that kids today don't have. And so that's what we're really trying to get them to do, is practice that autonomy.
Some of it you're talking about leads me to a question of breakdown in the kids you were looking at in social context. Are you looking at a lot of city kids? Are you looking at country kids? Is there a blend? Because I mean, I think about my own childhood, and it's a little bit more Mayberry-like, because I grew up in Solvang, and a lot more freedom.
Yeah.
I could see growing up in the Southland here, you know, maybe not so much having that, but what's some of that breakdown like, and or is what you're looking at across you know, spectrum, or is it largely the city life?
Yeah, that's interesting. So one of the things that we're chasing down right now in terms of the ways that churches are responding is that there's a perception that, you know, the rural spaces are so much different than city spaces. However, what we're finding is, in terms of faith development, the rural spaces and the urban space and urban churches are actually a lot more similar than the suburban church. Yeah. Because of the ways that the urban church and the rural churches have to rely on the community to help support the growth of kids, that's a part of it, right? So you know, Solvang, love Solvang. You know, you're out there now. It's probably a little bit more suburbia, but like you know, rolling fields. Like, let's go, you know, over that hill and over that hill over there, blah 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 blah. And there's a reliance on the community to kind of keep watch out for our kids. In the urban space, it's a lot similar insofar as, like, you're walking outside. Auntie, you know, May is down the road, and she's going to keep an eye out on you. Auntie May isn't my, like, blood aunt, but she's going to make sure that things are good, and she's going to call me if things go wrong, right? And so there's a lot of crossover in the ways that those churches are engaging kids, and we're once again, there's more data there to chase down, but I think there's something to be said for that. There's something different to be said for the anxieties that kids feel in both of those spaces. So the anxieties that kids feel in food deserts, and the anxieties that kids feel in making sure that they have to get to school on their own because mom and dad are, you know, they had to be out the door at 4:00, you know, in the morning for their job or whatever, is very different than what you find in rural spaces. So, like, those type of things are going to be different. But I think the ways that we bring up kids in those spaces have some similarities that we're really trying to figure out. So, okay. Yeah.
Submission that we got asked, our youth often see the LGBT community as heroic for living their truth, and they see the church behaving in judgment and hateful ways towards this population. If this view turns young people away from the church, Christianity, and God, how do you suggest we as a church maintain a biblical view while still reaching young people?
Yeah. I've been testing this one out. So in many places, I feel like it's true. We talked about it last night. Love God, love others, right? There's not a whole lot of equivocation in that. There's not a lot of like, and we'll just do others and not these other people, right? If there's teachings of Jesus that are well known, that's one of them. This current group of kids is not only watching the way that you care about them, they are watching the way that you care about their friends. And if if you start to speak poorly about their friends, they start to wonder whether or not you're actually who you say you are in terms of a follower of Jesus. I've had multiples of parents say, yep, that's right. I had my daughter or son or whatever, like, they were bringing their friend over and they're like, hey, how do you like Johnny? Thinking like, oh, because Johnny was whatever, LGBTQ, black and a white community, you know what I mean? Like there's all these, like, I'm going to poke at the bear here and see how they respond. And parents are like, oh my gosh, Johnny's great, or you know what, I don't know, maybe you're not bringing him around anymore. And it's like, oh, okay, so you really don't care about my friends. How do I really care that you care about me? So under test, that is something that's happening in our communities. Not every community, and once again, I'm testing that out in a lot of spaces. I think one of the questions that you're asking is like, yeah, we're out there to try and figure out what it means to love and care for people in the world, and the more that we lean in with that which we say we are about, the better off we're going to be with the people who are inside the church walls. So, how do we care for them in really good ways? How do we care for young people that is holistic and honoring of them? And how do we make sure that when we stand on biblical truth, that we don't necessarily stand there so much as walk there? And by that I mean there's movement. We've got to have some clarity of movement. Well, I don't know exactly how this is going to turn out. This is what I'm reading, but I don't know what that means. And of high value for me, it means that I care for you and I care for your friends before I tell everybody that they're not allowed, right? I think those type of conversations become a catalyst for leaning into discipleship as it relates to Jesus, and become a place where we're challenged in our own understandings of what's going on. All that to say, we hold on to the truths that we know, right? And we have to. And we also walk in the places that say, I'm going to hold this truth open so that God can do whatever God's going to do so that he might draw all people to himself. That's a scary thing, right? Because here we are trying to figure out our best engagement in the world, knowing what we know and having read what we read. And providing space for the Holy Spirit to poke at us a little bit and say, hey, what about over here? What about over there? That's a hard question. Because at the base of that question a little bit is the idea of like, where do we get to say no? Where do we get to set up the boundary? Where do we get to stop caring for people? Well, I guess I'll just point to Jesus and say, wherever Jesus tells you to stop caring for people is where you get to stop caring for people.
We got about 10 more minutes. Other questions? Otherwise, I have a scenario for you that I'll ask.
Oh, case study, cool.
You've already had multiple.
He's got more.
Well, Alyssa does have a question. I'd like to give voice to her question. Off of what you're just talking about here, it sounds like what you're talking about is taking less of a systematic, like doctrinal stance and more of kind of a Jewish narrative kind of a stance, right? Mm-hmm. Is that?
Yep.
Great.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
I mean, Alyssa.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just speak to something from a former denomination that I was a part of that will go nameless. In a congregation in San Diego, the pastor had the audacity to write a newsletter article for the denominational newsletter speaking to, we need to figure out a different way to minister to LGBTQ people because they exist, rather than pretending that they don't exist or won't exist, and he got kicked out of his church. So, it's and he wasn't saying, we need to be full, like, marching in pride parades and stuff. He's just saying, these people are in this place, in this space, living this life. How do we minister? How do we not pretend that they don't exist and actually minister to them. And he got kicked out of, and it's a rather sizable church in San Diego. So
Yeah.
you?
It wasn't that he got kicked out, not from the church.
No, not from the church, from
Not
the
from the church.
hierarchy
Yep.
in the denomination, saying that we can't, and then another pastor in Bakersfield got kicked out of his church because he had a same-sex couple that happened to just play in the worship band, and no one knew it for like over a year, and then they found out, and it broke up the church. So,
Yeah.
it's like trying to live in reality, but also holding to some biblical understanding of some things and how to do ministry in that way.
Yeah, I would go one step further to say in our Faith Beyond Youth Group book and study, one of the pieces to that is teaching for transformation. One of the high values for making sure that young people are able to engage is that volunteers would teach for transformation. And the way we teach for transformation is really we center it in Jesus, right? And say, wait a second, if we're going to teach for transformation, how do we do it like Jesus does that transformation? And when you look at the scriptures, and you all know this, and when I say it, you're going to go, yeah, oh yeah, that's right. Jesus was 40 times more likely to ask a question than he was to make a statement, right? And so when we ask good questions of our kids, and we ask good questions, and those questions affect us, we're able to walk with them in ways that are more rabbinic in that way, or just more process-oriented, more than we're saying, like, here are the doctrinal truths that you've got to sign up for, and you can put a checklist of all the doctrinal truths and put your initials by them, and when you do that, we consider you a Christian. I mean, how well is that working for anybody, right? Like that's just not the way we make disciples. And I think there's something to be said for creating space for those realities. So,
Are there other questions, or else I'm going to give him a scenario?
scenario.
Okay. So you're a Jedi.
Yes.
And you're able to walk into a church.
I am a.
Oh,
okay, just kidding.
I'm sure. Have you?
Yeah.
You've probably built the lightsaber and everything.
I do
And
have
you're able
one,
to
yes.
walk into a congregation today and do the whole Jedi mind trick, erase everyone's minds based on how they think ministry should be done, and you were able to craft youth ministry from the ground up with no pushback from anybody, which is the biggest magic trick of all.
This is a beautiful question. I love it.
What would you, based on all the research and everything, what would you think that should look like, hopefully look like? You can go with it whatever direction you want to.
I love this question. So like Jedi mind trick, or the flashy thing from Men in Black. I want the flashy thing, right? So you forget all the things. You just forget everything. Here's where I would start. The primary youth pastors in the church are 60 years old and above. That they perceive themselves as like, that's when they get to do youth ministry. Like, oh my gosh, like the sense that they have is like, when I get to be 60, I'm so excited because then that's when I get to do youth ministry. Why? Because they're the ones, I've started to think about this, I'm in mid-50s. I started thinking about like, man, if I would go back to my old self right now, these are the things I would tell myself. These are the things that feel important in the world. These are the ways that I would love to be loved. These are the things that are great. I've got grandkids. They're invested. So I would start with that. It's like centering the older generation folks as folks that have wild imagination and care for kids. Now, I think some of you guys are sitting around like, okay, cool, that's really great, but I'm not going to be sitting, I'm not going to camp. Okay, that's fine. We can conscript 30 and 40-year-olds to go to camp because they have space and time and energy. But the primary youth leaders are those who are older generation people. And I would create systems and situations where the whole church is together more often. So I would get rid of age group ministry on Sunday mornings. I would create the worship space to be inviting for all. Going back to what I said yesterday about like, have you ever baby-proofed this space? I would baby-proof this space like nobody's business, and sermons would be aimed at those who are in middle school or high school. Why would I do that? Why? Because you name a church that I've gone that you've gone to that still does a children's sermon, and that most of the adults aren't like, this is the greatest part of the service. Sorry, pastors. Right? Those are the moments where people are like, oh, I get it. Like, you need to kind of dumb it down for me. And it needs to be quick and it needs to be engaging. And usually the children's sermon is the most quick, engaging place to get one point across that people can go, yep, I can go do that today. It would be more connective and more thoughtful, and it would be less pews and more circles. Now, if people have said that, there's a bunch of people out there saying like less pews and more circles, but that's how I would start it. I would completely shift and retool it that way. When do we do it? When can we do that? Today. I'll be your pastor. That would be. I'd come out of retirement. Let's do it. I'm in.
Any other
that's
questions?
where I would do it. Here's why I say that. Let me back up to just why I say that. 60 to 80-year-olds used to be the community that felt the most lonely in the world. Currently, that's been usurped by Gen Z, who feel more lonely than older generation folks. Let's put two generation folks that feel alone in this world together to talk about that and allow them to kind of figure out what the next stages of their life are together. Mm-hmm. That would be amazing. The numbers, I think, it jumped for younger generation people from the 30 percentile to the 60 percentile, and for the most part, people in their 70s and 80s kind of continue to say that 40 percentile would say that they're lonely. So this generation is alone, they're anxious-ridden, and let's put two generations that are trying to figure that out together. That's why I say that. So,
cool.
Yeah.
I would probably just add too, we have Youth Sunday once a month at our church where the youth are in charge. They usher, they help with communion, they read, they do all, we don't let them preach because that would just be anathema. But maybe we'll move towards that one day. But what that led into for probably about 5 months, we had a brother and sister who basically were our ushers for our first service because no one would sign up at all. And so it just turned to Danica and Charlie ushered for first service. And they did a fantastic job. We also have Everett, who's in 4th grade, who does almost a better job than any of the other adults in ushering because he just wants to be involved in the service. So, grab your youth and give them a job, and it gives them a purpose to be there other than mom and dad brought me here. They get to go, oh, I get to help with, I have youth that fight over being able to help with communion. So, well, thank you very much, Chuck. Let's give a hand to Chuck for being with us this weekend.
Those are great questions.
We will dismiss for lunch, and I think we're gonna modify the schedule a little bit. I'm thinking 12 to 12:30 for lunch, Scott, and then we'll meet back in here for the communion service and hear from Julie, our Mrs. Bishop, just Ms. Bishop. Okay, Ms. Bishop. The Right Reverend Julie Smith. Did you bring your funny hat? Okay, good. But let me go ahead and pray for our lunch, and then you can go ahead and grab some food, and then we'll meet back in here. Gracious God, we do give you thanks for your mercies to us. We thank you for the ministry of Chuck and Fuller Youth Institute and all the work that they're doing to help us learn how to minister to younger generations. Please help us and guide us in that and go back energized to our congregations to help in that. We pray now that you would be with us in our conversations over lunch. Bless the food that has been prepared for us. Help us to be thankful for it. Make it a nourishment to our bodies. Bless our lives to your service. In your name we pray, and everybody said, Amen.